I was standing in my driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring at the third violation notice in 2 weeks when I realized my former best friend wasn't just being petty anymore. She was trying to destroy me. The latest notice cited my mailbox color as non-compliant with community standards, which was insane because I'd painted it the exact shade of forest green specified in the HOA guidelines. I'd even kept the receipt from Sherwin-Williams with the color code circled in red ink. But Jessica Whitmore, newly elected president of the Desert Vista Homeowners Association, didn't care about facts. She cared about making my life miserable enough that I'd pack up and leave the neighborhood where I'd lived for 8 years. Jessica and I went back almost 20 years. We met in college at Arizona State University, bonded over late-night study sessions and terrible cafeteria food, and stayed close even after graduation. She was the maid of honor at my wedding to Claire. I was there when she went through her divorce 5 years ago, letting her crash on my couch for 3 months while she got back on her feet. We were the kind of friends who knew each other's coffee orders and childhood traumas. At least, we used to be. Everything changed 6 months ago when Claire left me. The divorce was brutal, not because of fighting or infidelity, but because of the quiet way love can just evaporate. One day you're planning a future together, and the next day she's telling you she hasn't been happy in years and needs to find herself. Jessica had been supportive at first, bringing over casseroles and offering to help me sort through the legal paperwork. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. I didn't notice it happening, not until it was too late. The day after my divorce was finalized, Jessica showed up at my door with wine and what I thought was sympathy. We drank on my back patio, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky orange and purple. She told me she'd always thought Claire and I were wrong for each other. Then she told me she'd had feelings for me since college, feelings she'd buried because I was with Claire, feelings that had only grown stronger over the years. I was still raw from the divorce, still trying to figure out who I was as a single man after a decade of marriage. I told Jessica as gently as I could that I valued our friendship too much to risk it, that I wasn't in a place to start anything romantic with anyone, and that I'd never seen her that way. It was the truth, but truth doesn't always soften the blow. She left without finishing her wine, and I thought maybe we just needed some space. A week later, she announced her candidacy for HOA president. A month after that, she won in a landslide, running on a platform of returning Desert Vista to its former glory and enforcing standards that have been neglected for too long. 2 weeks into her presidency, I received my first violation notice. Now, standing in my driveway with notice number 3 crumpled in my fist, I watched Jessica's black BMW pull into her driveway 4 houses down. She stepped out in a crisp white blouse and navy slacks, her blonde hair pulled back in the severe bun she'd adopted since taking office. She saw me looking and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I walked down the sidewalk toward her house, the Arizona heat making my shirt stick to my back even though it was only 9 in the morning. "Jessica, we need to talk about these notices." She pulled a stack of folders from her passenger seat, not bothering to look at me. "Mr. Morrison, if you have concerns about a violation notice, you can submit a written appeal to the HOA board. The process is outlined in your community guidelines." "Mr. Morrison, are you serious right now?" "It's me, Tom. We've known each other for 20 years. And as HOA president, I have to maintain professional boundaries with all residents." She finally met my eyes, and I saw something cold there, something I'd never seen before. "The mailbox color is clearly outside the acceptable range. You have 14 days to repaint it or face a daily fine of $50. I painted it the exact color from the guidelines. I have the receipt. The color code matches perfectly. The guidelines specify hunter green. Your mailbox is forest green. There's a difference." She started walking toward her front door. I followed her up the driveway. "Jessica, come on. This is ridiculous and you know it. What's really going on here?" She spun around so fast I almost bumped into her. What's going on is that I'm doing the job the community elected me to do. For years, standards have slipped in this neighborhood. Property values have stagnated because people like you think the rules don't apply to them. Well, that ends now. People like me. What does that mean? It means people who let their grass get half an inch too long. People who leave their garbage cans visible from the street past 7 a.m. on non-collection days. People who think they can paint their mailboxes whatever color they want and call it close enough. Her voice had risen with each word, and I could see neighbors starting to peer through windows. The grass thing was one time, and it was because I was in the hospital with food poisoning. The garbage can was blown over by wind, and the mailbox color is correct, Jessica. Your manufacturing violations. File an appeal if you disagree. Have a nice day, Mr. Morrison. She went inside and closed the door in my face. I stood there in her driveway feeling like I just had a conversation with a stranger wearing my best friend's face. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Ray, who lived next door to me. Dude, did you see the email from the HOA? Emergency meeting tonight at 7. Mandatory attendance. I hadn't checked my email yet. I pulled up my phone and found the message sent at 8 a.m. The subject line read, Mandatory Community Meeting Ongoing Violations and Enforcement Actions. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about me and Jessica anymore. She was escalating. The meeting was held in the community center, a Spanish-style building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly got used for yoga classes and kids' birthday parties. When I arrived at 7, the parking lot was already full. I recognized most of the cars belonging to the 73 households that made up Desert Vista. Whatever Jessica had planned, she'd managed to get almost everyone to show up. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a table at the front where Jessica sat with the other board members. Karen Hendricks, a retired teacher in her 60s who served as secretary. Mike Patterson, the treasurer and a local insurance agent, and Brenda Costa, the vice president who ran a real estate agency in Scottsdale. Jessica had orchestrated her board carefully, recruiting people who either owed her favors or stood to benefit from her aggressive enforcement agenda. I grabbed a seat in the back next to Ray, a software engineer in his 40s who'd been in the neighborhood almost as long as me. Any idea what this is about? He whispered. I have a pretty good guess, I said, watching Jessica shuffle papers at the front table. At exactly 7 p.m., Jessica stood and called the meeting to order. She was in her element, commanding the room with the confidence of someone who knew she had the power and intended to use it. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I know mandatory meetings are inconvenient, but the issues we're facing require immediate community attention and action. She clicked a remote, and a projector screen behind her lit up with a PowerPoint presentation. The first slide read, Protecting Our Property Values, a Comprehensive Enforcement Initiative. When I ran for president 6 months ago, I made a promise to restore this community to the high standards that once made Desert Vista the most desirable neighborhood in Scottsdale. Unfortunately, years of lax enforcement have led to declining property values and an overall deterioration in our community's appearance. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph with a downward trend line. As you can see, our average property values have increased at only half the rate of comparable neighborhoods in the area. Brenda Costa nodded vigorously from her seat at the board table. Of course, the real estate agent would back any initiative framed around property values. Jessica clicked through several more slides showing photos of supposed violations around the neighborhood. A lawn with a few dandelions, a car parked on the street overnight, a patio umbrella that was red instead of the approved tan or brown, someone's holiday decorations still up 3 days after Christmas. Many of the photos were time-stamped from early morning or late evening, suggesting Jessica had been driving around the neighborhood specifically looking for things to cite. Over the past 6 months, the board has issued 147 violation notices. Of those, 32 remain unresolved. She clicked to a new slide and my stomach clenched. It was a photo of my house, my mailbox circled in red. My name appeared at the top of a list. Some residents have been particularly resistant to compliance, accumulating multiple violations and refusing to take corrective action. Heads turned toward me. I felt Ray shift uncomfortably in his seat beside me. Under existing HOA bylaws, the board has the authority to impose fines for continued non-compliance. However, we're proposing amendments to strengthen enforcement mechanisms. Specifically, we're recommending that residents with 3 or more unresolved violations within a 6-month period be subject to mandatory mediation. If violations continue, the board would have the authority to place a lien on the property and ultimately initiate foreclosure proceedings. The room erupted. Voices overlapped as neighbors tried to process what Jessica had just said. Foreclosure. Over a mailbox color, an elderly man in the front row stood up. Jessica, that seems extreme. We're talking about minor cosmetic issues. Are they minor, Harold? When one person's neglect brings down everyone's property values, is that minor? When someone refuses to maintain basic standards, should the rest of us suffer? She was good, I had to admit. She'd framed this as protecting the community rather than targeting me specifically. Karen Hendricks, the secretary, cleared her throat. For clarity, the proposed amendments would require a vote from the full community. We're asking for feedback tonight and we'll schedule a formal vote within 30 days. This is insane, I said, standing up. All eyes turned to me. Jessica, you've been issuing bogus violations for months. You know my mailbox is the right color. You know my grass was 1 day late getting mowed because I was sick. You're manufacturing this whole crisis. Jessica's expression didn't change. Mr. Morrison, if you believe any violation notice was issued in error, you're welcome to file a formal appeal. The board reviews all appeals at our monthly meetings. However, accusing me of manufacturing violations because you don't want to follow the rules is inappropriate and frankly insulting to the board members who volunteer their time to serve this community. We're not talking about following rules. We're talking about you abusing your position because I stopped myself, aware that I was about to reveal personal history in front of 70 neighbors. Because what, Mr. Morrison? Please enlighten us. Her eyes challenged me to say it, to tell everyone that she was doing this because I'd rejected her romantic advances. I couldn't do it. It would sound petty, and without proof, it would be my word against hers. Worse, it might make her look like the victim. Because you're on a power trip, I finished lamely. Jessica smiled that cold smile again. I'm on a mission to protect this community. If you see that as a power trip, perhaps you should ask yourself whether Desert Vista is the right neighborhood for you anymore. There it was, out in the open. She wanted me gone. Ray stood up beside me. I've lived here for 9 years and I've never seen this kind of aggressive enforcement. Tom's right. Something about this doesn't add up. Why the sudden push for these extreme measures? A few other voices murmured agreement, but Brenda Costa jumped in. I can tell you exactly why. I've been a realtor in Scottsdale for 15 years. Neighborhoods with strong HOA enforcement consistently maintain higher property values. We're not being aggressive, we're being responsible. The meeting devolved into arguments, with some residents backing Jessica's enforcement agenda and others expressing concern about overreach. After another 30 minutes of debate, Jessica called for a vote on whether to proceed with drafting the formal amendments. The motion passed, 42 to 28, with 3 abstentions. I left feeling sick. Jessica had just gotten community approval to create the legal framework to force me out of my home. Over the next 2 weeks, I repainted my mailbox, this time bringing the paint can and receipt to Jessica's house before I even opened it, making her confirm in writing that the color was correct. She examined it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond, finally nodding and signing off. I documented everything, taking photos and keeping all correspondence. But the day after I repainted the mailbox, I got a new violation notice. Unauthorized structure in backyard visible from neighboring properties. The structure in question was my shed, which had been there when I bought the house 8 years ago. It was a standard 6x8 wooden shed where I kept lawn equipment and tools, and it was clearly visible in the listing photos from when I purchased the property. I called an emergency meeting with my lawyer, Richard Chen, a real estate attorney I'd found through a colleague. His office was in downtown Scottsdale, in one of those modern glass buildings that reflected the desert sun like a mirror. Richard was in his late 40s, meticulous and exactly the kind of detail-oriented person I needed. "They're claiming the shed is unauthorized," Richard asked, reviewing the violation notice I'd brought him. "It's been there for at least 8 years, probably longer. The previous owners built it, and it's been through multiple HOA inspections without issue." Richard pulled up the Desert Vista HOA bylaws on his computer. "Did you get written approval when you purchased the property?" "No, because it was already there." The HOA didn't require any retroactive approvals during the sale. That's going to be our argument. The structure predates current enforcement, and the HOA has implicitly approved it through years of inaction. He made notes on his legal pad. "But I have to be honest with you, Tom. Even if we fight this violation and win, she's just going to find another one. You said she's issued 3 notices so far, 4, counting this one. And you believe this is personal retaliation for rejecting her romantic advances. I know it is, but I can't prove it. It's not like she sent me threatening texts or emails about it." Richard leaned back in his chair. HOA disputes are tricky because the law generally gives HOAs broad discretion in enforcement as long as they follow their own bylaws. What we need to establish is a pattern of selective enforcement or harassment. Do you know if she's targeting anyone else with this level of scrutiny? Not that I've heard. I mean, she's issuing violations to other people, but nobody else has 4 in a month. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to document everything. Every interaction with her, every violation notice, every HOA meeting. We're also going to file a formal complaint with the board alleging selective enforcement and requesting a third-party review of all violations issued under her presidency. It won't stop her, but it creates a record. If she does try to move forward with foreclosure down the line, we'll have evidence of harassment. I left Richard's office feeling slightly better, at least like I had a plan. But that feeling evaporated when I got home and found Jessica standing in my backyard, taking photos of my shed with her phone. "What are you doing on my property?" I called out, walking around the side of the house. She didn't even look startled. HOA Bylaws Section 12, Paragraph 4. The board has the right to inspect properties for compliance purposes with 48 hours written notice. I sent you an email 2 days ago. I pulled out my phone and checked. Sure enough, buried in my inbox between spam messages was an email sent at 11 p.m. 2 nights ago, notifying me of a routine compliance inspection scheduled for today between 1 and 5 p.m. It was currently 3:30. "You could have knocked on the front door." I did. "You weren't home." "But since I have the right to inspect exterior structures, I didn't need to wait for you." She took a few more photos from different angles. "This shed violates multiple guidelines. The wood is weathered and not maintained to community standards. The roof shingles don't match approved materials. And most importantly, there's no record of the structure ever being formally approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Because it was built before the current guidelines were in place. The HOA has known about this shed for years. Ignorance of violations doesn't constitute approval. You have 30 days to remove the structure or submit a formal application for retroactive approval, including detailed plans and specifications. The application fee is $500, and the review process takes 60 to 90 days. During the review period, you'll be subject to daily fines of $75 for the ongoing violation. I did the math in my head. Even at the low end, That was $4,500 in fines while I waited for them to review an application for a shed that had existed for years. You're really going to fine me $75 a day for a shed that was here when I moved in. I'm going to enforce the rules equally for all residents. The fact that previous boards were negligent in their duties doesn't mean I have to be. She walked past me toward the side gate. Oh, and I noticed your garbage cans are visible from the street. That's another violation. They need to be stored behind a screen or in your garage. You have 7 days to comply. Are you doing this to everyone? Are you inspecting every backyard in the neighborhood? She paused at the gate and finally looked directly at me. I'm conducting random compliance inspections as authorized by the bylaws. If I happen to find violations, I'm required to issue notices. That's my job. This isn't about the job and you know it. This is about us, about what happened. Her expression hardened. There is no us, Tom. There never was, not in the way that mattered, and maybe if there had been, you wouldn't be in this situation. She left before I could respond. That evening I called Ray and asked if he'd received any inspection notices. He hadn't. I spent the next hour calling other neighbors, people I'd gotten to know over the years. None of them had been inspected. Jessica was targeting me specifically. I forwarded all of this information to Richard, who sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA board documenting the selective enforcement and demanding they cease all violations against me pending an independent review. The board responded with a letter of their own, stating that all enforcement actions were proper and that any complaints should go through the formal appeals process. The formal appeals process, as outlined in the bylaws, required me to submit written appeals for each violation, pay a $50 filing fee per appeal, and wait for the board to schedule a hearing. The board met once a month. If they denied my appeal, my only recourse was to take them to court, which could take months or years and cost tens of thousands in legal fees. Jessica had designed a perfect trap. She could issue violations faster than I could appeal them, and even when I won appeals, she could just find new things to cite. The daily fines were adding up, and the threat of liens and foreclosure hung over everything. 3 weeks after the shed violation, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my front door. This one wasn't about a violation. It was a notice that the HOA board had voted to approve the new enforcement amendments, pending a community-wide vote scheduled for the following month. The amendments included everything Jessica had outlined in the meeting: mandatory mediation after 3 violations, liens after 5, and potential foreclosure after 7. I currently had 5 violations on my record. Jessica had engineered the rules specifically to target me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in the house I'd bought with my ex-wife, the house where I'd planned to raise kids that never came, and wondered if I was going to lose everything because I'd been honest with a friend about my feelings, or lack thereof. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound outside. Living in Arizona, you get used to occasional noises at night, coyotes, javelinas, the wind, but this sounded like metal scraping. I got up and looked out my bedroom window, which faced the side yard. Someone was spray painting my fence. I ran downstairs and out the front door, not even bothering with shoes. By the time I got to the side yard, the person was gone, but the damage was clear. Someone had spray-painted violator in red letters across 3 fence panels, each letter about 2 feet tall. I called the police. 2 officers from the Scottsdale Police Department arrived 20 minutes later, took photos, and filed a report for vandalism. They asked if I had any idea who might have done it. I told them about the HOA situation, about Jessica, about the escalating violations. They were sympathetic, but pointed out that I had no proof Jessica was involved. Could be just kids, one officer said. We've had some graffiti issues in this area lately. But I knew it wasn't kids. The word choice was too specific, too targeted. Someone wanted to make sure I knew this was about the HOA violations. The next morning, I got a violation notice citing me for the graffiti on my fence. The notice stated that I had 48 hours to remove the spray paint and restore the fence to compliance or face daily fines of $100. I took photos of everything, documented the police report, and sent it all to Richard. Then I went to Home Depot, bought paint stripper and fence stain, and spent 6 hours in the brutal Arizona sun removing the graffiti. My hands blistered and my back ached, but I got it done within the deadline. The violation was marked as resolved, but I'd added another one to my record. I now had 6 violations, even though I'd fixed all of them. Under Jessica's new amendments, I was 1 violation away from the foreclosure process. Richard filed a harassment lawsuit against Jessica and the HOA board, claiming selective enforcement, abuse of power, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit alleged that Jessica was retaliating against me for rejecting her romantic advances and using her position as HOA president to force me to sell my property. We had documentation of every violation, proof that no other residents were being targeted with the same scrutiny, and testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed Jessica's behavior. The lawsuit was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court 3 days before the community vote on the enforcement amendments. Jessica's response was to issue another violation. My house number wasn't properly illuminated according to fire code requirements. Never mind that the fire department had never cited anyone in the neighborhood for this, or that half the houses on the street had the same setup. I was in violation, and that made 7. The community vote took place on a Tuesday evening in October. The weather had finally started to cool down, the temperature dropping to a pleasant 75 degrees as the sun set. I arrived at the community center to find it even more packed than the previous meeting. Word had spread about the lawsuit, and people were taking sides. Jessica called the meeting to order and presented the enforcement amendments. She spent 20 minutes outlining the benefits: higher property values, better community standards, clear consequences for non-compliance. She showed more graphs and statistics, all carefully selected to support her narrative. Then it was time for community discussion. I stood up. Before we vote, everyone here needs to know what's really happening. Jessica has issued 7 violations against me in 2 months. In that same period, she's issued a total of 15 violations to all other residents combined. She inspected my property without inspecting anyone else's. She's targeting me specifically because I rejected her personal advances after my divorce, and she's using the HOA as a weapon to force me out of the neighborhood. The room went silent. Jessica's face turned red, then white. "That is a disgusting lie," she said, her voice shaking. "You're making false accusations because you don't want to follow the rules. Then explain why you haven't inspected anyone else's backyard. Explain why my violation notices started exactly 2 weeks after I told you I didn't want a relationship with you. Explain why you were in my backyard taking photos while other houses on this street have violations you've ignored." Ray stood up. "He's right. I've watched this happen. Jessica has been relentless with Tom while barely glancing at the rest of us. My garbage cans are visible from the street half the time, and I've never gotten a violation. Something isn't right here." Other voices joined in. People started asking questions, demanding to know why the enforcement seemed so uneven. Karen Hendricks, the secretary, looked uncomfortable. Even Brenda Costa, the real estate agent who'd been firmly in Jessica's camp, seemed uncertain. Jessica tried to regain control. "These accusations are part of Mr. Morrison's lawsuit strategy. He's trying to manipulate you into voting against measures that would benefit everyone. The enforcement has been fair and consistent." "Then let's see the records," someone called out. "Show us all the inspections you've done, all the violations you've issued. If it's fair, the numbers will prove it." Jessica hesitated just for a moment, but it was enough. The community sensed blood in the water. Karen Hendricks, perhaps sensing which way the wind was blowing, made a motion to table the vote pending a third-party audit of all enforcement actions under Jessica's presidency. The motion passed overwhelmingly. Jessica looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, but it was closer to over than she realized. 2 days after the meeting, I received a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was female, nervous, young. "Is this Tom Morrison, the guy with the HOA lawsuit?" "Yes, who is this?" "I'm calling because I think I have information you need. My mom is on the HOA board, Karen Hendricks. She's the secretary." My pulse quickened. "I'm listening." My mom's been keeping records. She didn't agree with a lot of what Jessica was doing, but she went along with it because Jessica can be really intimidating. But after that meeting, she's been losing sleep. She told me some stuff and I convinced her I should call you. "What kind of stuff?" "Jessica has been falsifying inspection records. She's been putting down that she inspected properties when she never did. And she's been changing dates on violation notices to make it look like she gave people more warning than she actually did. My mom has the original documents because she's secretary. She's supposed to shred old drafts, but she kept them. I think she knew something was wrong." "Would your mother be willing to testify to this?" There was a long pause. "She's scared." "Jessica threatened to sue her for defamation if she talked. But if you're already suing them, and if there's going to be an audit anyway, maybe the documents would speak for themselves." "Can you tell me exactly what documents your mother has?" Over the next 10 minutes, Karen's daughter, whose name was Emily, outlined a paper trail that proved Jessica had been systematically targeting me while fabricating compliance with fair enforcement practices. There were emails where Jessica had directed board members not to inspect certain properties. There were drafts of violation notices with dates that had been changed to make timelines appear different. Most damning, there was a text message thread between Jessica and Brenda Costa where they explicitly discussed using violations to force me to sell. "My mom's willing to turn everything over to the auditor," Emily said, "but she wants protection. She doesn't want to get sued or lose her position on the board. I'll have my attorney contact her. If she cooperates, we can protect her as a whistleblower. Tell her she's doing the right thing." Richard was ecstatic when I told him. We immediately requested an emergency hearing and submitted Emily's tip to the third-party auditor the community had hired. The auditor was a retired judge named Martin Reeves who specialized in HOA disputes. He had a reputation for being thorough and utterly impartial. Judge Reeves conducted his audit over 3 weeks, interviewing board members, reviewing all documents, and physically inspecting properties throughout the neighborhood. Karen Hendricks provided her evidence, and once she broke ranks, Mike Patterson, the treasurer, also came forward with concerns about financial irregularities related to the violation fines. The audit report was released on a Friday afternoon in November. It was 37 pages long, meticulously detailed and absolutely devastating to Jessica. Judge Reeves found that Jessica had issued violations to me at a rate 15 times higher than any other resident. He found that she had conducted compliance inspections on only 3 properties, mine and 2 houses whose owners had supported my position at the community meeting. He found that violation notices had been backdated to create the appearance of proper warning periods. He found that the shed violation was invalid because the structure predated current regulations and had been implicitly approved through years of HOA inaction. He found that 2 violations, including the graffiti citation, were issued in bad faith, as I was clearly the victim rather than the violator. Most critically, he found text messages between Jessica and Brenda Costa that said, "He'll sell eventually. Nobody wants to live somewhere they're not welcome. Keep the pressure on." The report concluded with a recommendation that all violations issued to me be vacated, that Jessica be removed from her position as HOA president, and that the board consider filing a complaint with law enforcement regarding potential misconduct. The community called an emergency meeting for the following Tuesday. I walked into that meeting with my head held high for the first time in months. The room was packed, but this time the energy was different. People weren't divided. They were united in their anger at having been manipulated. Jessica sat at the board table looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her severe bun had been replaced by loose hair that fell around her face. She wore a gray sweater instead of her usual crisp professional attire. She looked defeated. Karen Hendricks, acting as secretary, read the audit findings aloud. With each paragraph, Jessica seemed to shrink further. When Karen finished, she made a motion to accept the auditor's recommendations in full. Mike Patterson seconded. The vote was unanimous among the remaining board members. Brenda Costa had resigned the day before the report came out. Jessica was given 60 seconds to address the community before the vote to remove her. She stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "I made mistakes," she said, her voice barely audible. "I let personal feelings affect my judgment. I thought I was protecting the community, but I was really just—" She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, especially to Tom. You deserved better as a friend and as a neighbor. I'll resign effective immediately." She walked out of the community center without looking back. I felt a complicated mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and a strange sadness for the friendship we'd once had and could never get back. The community voted to install Ray as interim HOA president pending new elections. All of my violations were officially vacated. The daily fines were canceled. Richard negotiated a settlement where the HOA paid my legal fees and issued a formal apology. The harassment lawsuit was dropped as part of the settlement, but I wasn't done. The text messages between Jessica and Brenda suggested something that went beyond petty HOA abuse. They suggested a conspiracy to force me to sell my property through harassment, which in Arizona could constitute criminal coercion under state statute. Richard and I discussed it extensively. Did I want to press charges? Did I want to see my former best friend potentially face criminal prosecution? I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about the friendship we'd had, about how she'd been there for me through tough times, about how grief and rejection can twist people into versions of themselves they don't recognize. But I also thought about the 2 months of hell she'd put me through, the stress, the sleep I'd lost, the thousands of dollars in legal fees even with the settlement, and the fact that she'd been willing to take my home from me. I called the Scottsdale Police Department and filed a formal complaint. Detective Sarah Yamamoto was assigned to the case. She reviewed all the documentation, the audit report, the text messages, the violation notices, my testimony, and statements from neighbors who'd witnessed the escalating harassment. "This is actually more common than you'd think," Detective Yamamoto told me during one of our meetings at the station. "People abuse HOA positions to target individuals they have personal grudges against. It's hard to prosecute because it lives in this gray area between civil disputes and criminal conduct. But your case is solid. The text messages show intent, and the pattern of behavior shows a coordinated effort to cause you emotional distress and financial harm." Arizona law defines criminal coercion as compelling someone to do something against their will through threats or harassment. The text messages where Jessica and Brenda discussed forcing me to sell, combined with the systematic violations and fines, met that standard. Detective Yamamoto forwarded the case to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. In January, 5 months after Jessica had first sent me that mailbox violation notice, she was charged with 1 count of criminal coercion and 1 count of abuse of authority. Brenda Costa was charged as an accomplice. The charges carried potential jail time, though the prosecutor indicated they'd be open to a plea deal given that this was a first offense and no one had suffered permanent financial harm. Jessica's attorney reached out to Richard, asking if I'd be willing to support a plea agreement in exchange for Jessica avoiding jail time. I agreed, on the condition that she write a full confession detailing what she'd done and why, that she perform 200 hours of community service, that she pay additional restitution for my time and emotional distress, and that she never serve in an HOA leadership position again. She agreed to all of it. The confession arrived a week later, handwritten on legal paper. In it, she explained that after her divorce she'd become obsessed with control, with creating order in her life by enforcing order around her. When I rejected her, it triggered something that made her feel powerless, and the HOA presidency had given her a way to regain that power at my expense. She acknowledged that what she'd done was wrong, that she'd let her hurt feelings override her judgment and her ethics, and that she was deeply ashamed. I destroyed a 20-year friendship because I couldn't accept that you didn't feel the same way I did, she wrote. I tried to destroy your life because mine felt destroyed. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but it's the truth. The plea agreement was finalized in February. Jessica was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, a $5,000 fine split between restitution to me and court fees, and mandatory counseling. Brenda Coster received a similar sentence with a smaller fine. By March, almost a year after the nightmare had started, life in Desert Vista had returned to something approaching normal. Ray had been elected as the permanent HOA president, running on a platform of reasonable enforcement and community building rather than punishment. The new board implemented clear guidelines for inspections, requiring that they be truly random and documented, with residents having the right to appeal any violation without fees. I'd repainted my mailbox one more time, this time in a bright blue that was absolutely not in the HOA guidelines, just to make a point. Ray had laughed and told me as long as I changed it back within a month, he'd call it art. I changed it back after 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks of driving past my blue mailbox felt like freedom. Jessica sold her house in April and moved out of the neighborhood. I heard through the grapevine that she'd relocated to Temp and was working at a nonprofit helping women recover from difficult divorces. Maybe having to face what she'd become had pushed her to try to become something better. I hoped so. Claire, my ex-wife, reached out when she heard about what had happened. She'd moved to Flagstaff and was working as a teacher. We met for coffee and she told me she was sorry, both for how our marriage had ended and for what Jessica had put me through. I always thought she had feelings for you, Claire admitted. But I figured if you didn't see it, it wasn't my place to say anything. Would it have made a difference? Probably not, but maybe you would have been more careful after we split up. We parted as friends, or at least as people who no longer hurt each other. It was more than I'd expected. On a warm evening in late April, I was sitting on my back patio, looking at my shed, which was still standing, officially approved by the new HOA board after a 5-minute review, when Ray came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might want some company," he said, settling into one of my patio chairs. We drank beer and watched the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple that made the landscape look like it was on fire. We didn't talk about Jessica or the HOA or any of it. We talked about sports and work and Ray's upcoming vacation to San Diego. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Ray asked, "You ever think about moving? After everything that happened, I wouldn't blame you for wanting a fresh start." I'd thought about it. There had been moments during the worst of the harassment when I'd fantasized about selling everything and buying a condo downtown where there was no HOA, no neighbors who knew my history, no memories of the life I'd planned with Claire. But sitting there on my patio, looking at the yard I'd maintained and the house I'd made into a home, I realized the answer was no. "This is my home," I said. "I'm not letting anyone take it from me, not even the memory of what happened. Besides, if I left, who would keep you honest as HOA president?" Ray laughed. "Fair point, though I promise my administration will be significantly less dramatic. That's a pretty low bar, and yet I'm confident I'll clear it." We finished our beers as the night settled in, bringing with it the cool desert air that made Arizona evenings perfect. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was having a barbecue, and the smell of grilled meat drifted over. A few houses down, kids were playing in a yard, their laughter carrying in the quiet night. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. People living their lives, mostly getting along, handling problems with common sense instead of power trips and revenge. Jessica had forgotten that, somewhere along the way. She'd turned the HOA into a weapon instead of what it was meant to be, a way for neighbors to collectively take care of their shared spaces. The lawsuit had been settled, the criminal charges had been resolved, and the community had moved on. But I knew I'd carry the experience with me for a long time. I'd learned that people you trust can become strangers, that love rejected can curdle into something toxic, and that systems designed to help communities can just as easily be used to destroy individuals. I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, that I could fight back when cornered, and that standing up for yourself matters even when it's exhausting and expensive and emotionally draining. Jessica had tried to break me, but I'd survived. More than survived, I'd won. A few months later, in early summer, I was at Home Depot buying supplies for a new garden bed I was installing along my back fence. As I was loading bags of soil into my cart, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Tom. I turned to find Jessica standing there with her own cart, looking nervous and uncertain. She'd cut her hair short and dyed it darker. She looked older or maybe just tired. Jessica, hi. I didn't know what else to say. I'm just visiting the area. I moved to Temp. She seemed to feel the need to explain her presence, as if she needed permission to shop in Scottsdale. I heard, how are you doing? I'm okay, better. The therapy is helping, and the work at the nonprofit is good, hard but good. She looked down at her hands. I saw you and I wasn't sure if I should say hi, but I felt like I should. I wanted to tell you again that I'm sorry. The letter I wrote for the court didn't feel like enough. It was enough legally. Whether it's enough personally, I honestly don't know. That's fair. She started to push her cart past me, then stopped. For what it's worth, I'm glad you fought back. I'm glad you didn't just let me push you out. I needed to face what I'd become. So thank you for that, I guess, even though you didn't owe me anything. She left before I could respond. I stood there in the garden section of Home Depot, surrounded by bags of mulch and potted plants, processing the encounter. I didn't feel angry or vindicated or sad. I just felt like a chapter had finally, truly closed. That evening, I planted the new garden bed, filling it with native plants that could handle the Arizona heat: desert marigolds, brittlebush, sage. As I worked the soil and positioned each plant, I thought about growth and cycles, about how things die and new things take their place, about how the desert burns in summer but comes back to life with the winter rains. My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. Board meeting tomorrow at 7. Should be quick, mostly just routine stuff. Want to grab dinner after? I texted back a yes and went back to my planting. The sun was setting again, another Arizona sky show of impossible colors. My mailbox was the correct shade of hunter green. My shed was officially approved. My garbage cans were neatly stored. Everything was in compliance, but more importantly, everything was mine on my terms in my home. The Desert Vista HOA would continue to function, managing common areas and enforcing reasonable standards. Ray would serve his term and eventually someone else would take over. Years from now, new residents would move into the neighborhood who'd never heard about the drama that had unfolded, who'd never know that the quiet guy in the house on Saguaro Street had once fought a war against his former best friend over mailbox colors and property rights. But I would remember. I'd remember that homes aren't just structures and property lines. They're the places where we build our lives, where we retreat when the world is too much, where we're supposed to feel safe. And I'd remember that sometimes you have to fight for that safety, even when the threat comes from someone who used to be a friend, even when the battlefield is painted in violations and bylaws and HOA regulations. As the last light faded from the sky and the desert cooled, I watered my new plants and went inside. Tomorrow would bring another day in Desert Vista, another sunrise over the Arizona desert, Another chance to live my life in the home I'd refused to give up. Jessica was gone, the lawsuit was over, and the story had reached its end. I'd survived my former best friend's obsession with forcing me to sell my property, and I'd done it without losing myself in the process. That felt like victory enough. The garden would grow, the seasons would change, and life would continue. And I would still be here in my house, in my neighborhood, finally at peace.